Hey everyone, Pastor George here with Tuesday's Theolog, and this week I have a movie review, but not really a review because I'm not really in the business of talking about the cinematography and stuff like that. I can comment briefly on it, but really what I wanted to talk about more this week was the Northman and what it has to do with like religious and moral themes, which I think is actually really interesting. Um, Spoiler alert, I guess I can't really talk about this movie. Most of you won't see it because I know most of you. So don't worry about it. Anyway, yeah, let's dive in. So the Northman is about a Viking who goes in search of vengeance after his uncle kills his father and takes his mom as his wife. And if that story seems familiar, that's because it is. It's similar to Hamlet. In fact, Hamlet is based on a Scandinavian story. So this is like the Scandinavian version of that story. Um, and the main character's name is Hamlet, and you see all sorts of parallels there. And that's all purposeful because all of these things were once together. Shakespeare based his play off of the Danish sources and stuff like that. So it's all together and purposeful in that way. But anyway, this is a movie that is about, pagan Vikings in the 800s AD, right? So you have Christianity in Europe, right? It's in the British Isles. It's in mainland Europe, pretty extensively at this point. What would be Western Europe? It's starting to make its way into Eastern Europe, in the Balkans and in what is now Hungary and into Poland. And yeah, even a little bit into Scandinavia, but there are still large sections of Europe that are largely pagan. And this movie deals from that perspective. And I actually think it's really, really helpful because it doesn't tone down the brutality and the violence that was really at the core of a lot of pagan way of life, especially the Scandinavian pagan way of life. And of course, this is my heritage in respects. And so I studied a lot of this before, and I find it very accurate. One of the best scenes in the movie from a historical perspective, just to see depicted on screen. I think another movie did it, um, but I haven't seen it. But it happened back in the '90s, and I heard it was bad. I think it's called Flesh Eaters or something like that. I can't remember. But in this movie, they depict a Viking funeral of what would have been for a lord. Most people couldn't probably afford what they were doing, but in that thing, and this is really important, that they actually kill a slave girl who's going to accompany her master into the afterlife, and so they get her really drunk, and then they stab her and kill her, and it's very brutal. And they also kill a horse. There's lots of sacrificing of animals in this movie as well, because it is just a very bloody world, right? The gods have to be sated with blood, and so you do that in order to please them, and also to make sure you get what you want. And yeah, and it also shows the brutality in the way that they treated other people. At this point, slavery in large parts of Europe was on its way out, at least until later, when colonization happened. But for the most part, slavery was working its way out of Europe at this point because most people realized that you can't really hold someone as a slave if they're your brother or sister in Christ. Like, that doesn't really work out. It was, starting to be pretty looked down upon by the clergy and things like that. But in the Vikings and in the pagan parts of Europe, they still very much practice slavery, and you see how they treat slaves in this movie, and it's pretty much the way that you would expect people to be treated as slaves. And I really like that distinction between the pagan and the Christian in this, because there are Christian characters in this, although they're only minor characters, and they're largely kind of disgusted at what's going on, which is appropriate. That would be our response to these things. Undoubtedly, even if you aren't a Christian, you would be disgusted if you went back in time and saw a Viking funeral, because we're all Christian in our morality. At least, even though we're kind of in a post-Christian phase right now, we still have detritus, and people we still have moral feelings of Christians, even if they're not. And so one of the things that this movie does really well is it deals with that brutality and with that violence. And kind of, you could say, the big question of the movie is violence this endless cycle? Is revenge important? Is violence solution? And it actually kind of it kind of tiptoes because it on this one sense it seems like the director kind of wants to say no, it's not like it's not something that it solves all problems, but it ends with the character getting his revenge and kind of being fine with it. And so it's kind of this interesting plot thing where where it really doesn't come down. Now, the reason I think most people won't like it is if you don't really have a taste for artsy cinema or anything like that, you probably won't like it that much because it is kind of, I don't want to say, avant-garde or absurdist or anything. It's not. Like you can follow it. I think most people could, but it still is very plotting. It still, takes time to appreciate shots but not in a way that like stuff that is made for mass audiences. It's really just a lot of more the director's own vision. And if you're not into it, then you're not into it, and that's totally fine. I actually thought this movie was kind of mediocre outside of the fact that it just had interesting things to comment on when it came to violence. And the Christian response to that. So I don't know. See it if you want. It's rated R. I honestly can't remember if there's nudity in it. I'm just gonna say there is. So if you don't like nudity or violence or whatever, I don't think there's any cursing in it. Interestingly enough, there might be. I don't see. These things don't even faze me. This is how many movies I've watched and through my film studies degree and stuff that none of these things even are aware to me anymore. That's how much art I've seen. Anyway, yeah, Christianity's great, even though obviously violence has been committed in the name of Christ. Christianity has reshaped the way that we see violence, and that is an undoubtedly good thing. And I think everyone, whether you're secular or not, should be thankful for that. All right, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. We have a very good question for our Thursday mailbag that I'm somewhat not excited to answer, but on the other hand, somewhat very excited to answer. And it relates also to something that our church, not our churches in CPC, but our churches in the PCUSA did recently. So it's all going to kind of weave together. So I'll see you guys on Thursday. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Peace out.